coming up. Looking for a house.
Oh, wow.
Sucks really bad right now.
Yeah, looking for houses.
Yeah.
That's tough right now.
It's just been.
A huge market. out
Yesterday
there.
was my 19th house that I've been in.
Oh, wow. That gets.
So is there a lot of then competitive offers that are going in?
They're asking way too much money.
Yeah, over.
Well, that's it. Everything's
It's,
ridiculous.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's like, it's not worth it.
Mhm.
If you don't have to move, suck it up for another year.
Well, I kind of, I mean, I don't have to, but I kind of do.
Okay.
I've been renting a duplex for 15 and a half years now.
Yeah.
I've been there. And I thought that I had a house here in Delta Township.
Mhm.
And so I told him back in October, just to give him a heads up.
Yeah.
And then when the gentleman passed away, the owner of the house, and the kids started fighting amongst themselves.
Oh,
Yeah.
So it became a hot mess.
Yeah.
And so as of right now, I said, I'm not gonna hold my breath and,
Right.
so I've been looking. So my landlord is like, he's being really a sweetheart about it. And, but they had already told a friend of theirs that she could move in June. And I'm like, so I don't have a lot of time.
Right.
So
How are you?
I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah,
I'm good, sorry.
Yeah. I see things
Like,
on the
wait, I
market
forgot.
that-
Thanks. I'm like, I forgot. I've got medical
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And people are saying,
Well,
well,
we have
I
to
should
wear
sell
them.
my
It's
house
like,
and I should sell my
why not,
house. It's like,
right?
you have to have somewhere to go to.
Yeah.
And if
definitely,
you
'cause the
have
houses
somewhere
sell
to
so
go
fast.
to, you're gonna be paying
Doing
more for
good.
that
They're
house
doing-
and
yeah,
what
they're
that's
doing really
worth.
good.
So
This
you might
kid's
as well stay
like a
good and wait for the market
2-week
to
trip to
I have
do
a-
what it's gonna
Ireland,
do.
a
London.
friend who,
They decided to like do
they
it
put their
for
house
the
up for
falls because
sale,
like
not
they didn't want
thinking
to
that
get
it was
stuck.
gonna go just like
It
that.
goes
So they got-
fast.
So now they have to
Yeah.
move all their
So,
stuff. They're
but they're
packing
doing
up their
good.
stuff
They're
to move to
adorably
storage,
retired
but they
and
couldn't
super
get
active.
into their place. And they're gonna be moving with their mom.
Where are they moving?
I'm envious of their lifestyle right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
For the time being.
Yeah.
that would be nice, but my
Good for you.
hair's all cut. I seriously, I said, you know what? My office is big enough at the flower shop. I can put my bed in there.
Don't tell anybody.
You know, I've got the cooler for the
Rachel, how you doing?
refrigerator.
Good to see you.
The only
Good
thing
to
I
see
don't
you.
have is a shower.
It would work. I'm sure that you could work out some kind of deal with one of the hotels.
No, I have 3 dogs.
Oh, yeah. Well, then
Yes.
that wouldn't work.
Yes, that's part of the issue too.
Yeah.
Yes,
4 o'clock here.
Hey,
it
Rachel.
is 4 o'clock. Well, according to that.
Yes, I was pushing it when I walked in here, so.
I feel like it's right in front of me.
Got my mind over.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't. Mm-mm.
Hey, how are you?
It's so.
Good, how are you?
It's crazy. I mean, I've been into houses that
Is our
look like they should almost be condemned.
We will call this meeting of the CIA board to order. Okay. I'll call the roll here. Kelvin Jones. Here. Laura Miller.
Here.
Tony McGaldy. Here. Peggy Von Payne.
Here.
Rachel Singa.
Here.
And Chris Christopsey said that he could not be here today. Scott Berman said he could not be here today. And we have 1 vacancy, so we do have a quorum here. We have the agenda. Is there a motion to approve or any changes to be made to it?
So moved.
Support.
Been moved and supported to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Public comment. I see no one here in the room. We have approval of the minutes from the February 14th, 2022 meeting. What's the pleasure of the board on that? To approve those. Is there support?
Yeah, I support.
There is support. All those in favor of approving the February 14th, 2022 minutes as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Now we move to old business. Old business is just to give you an update on the developers agreement. We had hoped that that would be ready by now. We thought that was gonna be something that'd be quick, and that we would get that taken care of and then move on to the other business of the authority. But it's still with the attorneys, they're still talking. And that's not necessarily meaning things are like being confrontational. It just took way longer for it to be drafted by our attorney and presented to their side. And then they were, going to take some time to respond and everything to it. So bottom line is it's still is in the negotiating phases between, with what we presented, what the developer, was a response to it. So it'll at least be another meeting before we are able to bring back something that the developer has at least agreed to in principle. And then we'll bring it before this body to discuss and hopefully be able to ratify. But that's where that's at. That, as I said, that was something that we thought would be quick and be done at the beginning of the year relatively fast, and it's just ended up taking a lot longer than we expected. So we have looked, we intentionally wanted to kind of hold off on moving on to other stuff until that kind of got wrapped up and put to bed and have Delta crossings finished and then turn our focus on. But since it obviously is taking longer, we decided, we need to start moving forward. So that's why we have Suzanne joining us today. I'm assuming Suzanne's going to join us today to start talking about some ideas for, the next steps in terms of, getting us the information and starting the dialogue and the discussions that we need to move forward with looking at redeveloping the corridor. And another thing to keep in mind too, we're not going to have resources for a while anyway. There will be no revenue that is generated by the authority until later this year. And the initial amount of revenue that comes in, quite frankly, has already been spent by consultants. Attorneys and consultants have pretty much already spent everything we'll get this year. So there won't even really be any revenue for this body to really spend or to use for, planning purposes or whatever until 2023. So there really is not a problem if we take our time and have a thoughtful discussion to work towards, getting to that point. So with that, I guess I'll turn things over to, is Suzanne ready? Is she here or on there? Ready to go?
Here.
There she is. Hey, Suzanne, good to see you virtually tonight.
Oh my gosh, and it's scary. I'm like on the big screen behind you. So a little unsettling for me, but
So she's seeing herself.
I know. There's the background blurry and
You look
I'm a little
beautiful
bit
though.
cold, so if I start coughing, you'll be glad you're not in the same room with me. So it's great to see all of you guys again. And as was mentioned, the money by the time it comes in, there was also Brian and I had talked about at the time at the end of the year, we had, COVID was still kind of doing weird things and not sure where we're going to end up with COVID. But then also kind of taking the time to really scope out what you want as you get into the thinking about the corridor plan and the community engagement that you want to do is really important, because there's a lot of different ways that you could go in thinking about what kind of plan you need. And a couple examples might be, so some communities will say, well, we want a retail analysis of the corridor to understand the viability of retail along this. And there are specialty consulting firms that do that work. There's also firms that do simply housing market, target market analysis to understand what the demand for housing might be and what those demographics are, those profiles. So for example, if it's an empty nester, or a retired couple or a single person, this is the kind of housing that they look for. And they could tell you the kind of demographics that you might want to aim the housing supply towards. There's consultants that do that kind of work. There's also, we've talked a lot about what happens along Saginaw Avenue, Saginaw Highway, and what the design of that could be. And so there's lots of thinking that, as you coordinate with MDOT, about what does the township want on that side of the equation, not just what MDOT might design, but what you might want as a group. And so, and of course, all of those studies cost money, and trying to prioritize that work effort and think through what's going to give you the best set of information and help you make your investment decisions with those CIA dollars is something that you want to be thoughtful about. And we also know that you really wanted to look through and think about how to engage the community and what's most important. And so the memo that's in your packet, and I can pull it up on my share screen. Oh, I think I need Alana to give me permissions. Or you can pull it up from the packet too, either way. Oh, you got it? There we go.
Pull it up.
Okay. There we go. So when we talk about a planning process, you know, a thoughtful planning process, you really, in how you engage the community, you want to just overall, at the end of the day, when you've gone through all of this thinking and planning, at the end of the day, you want to have a strong and clear vision for the future. You want to be able to define a comprehensive redevelopment strategy for those underutilized properties. And when I say comprehensive, what are all of those moving parts? You started some of that work in developing the CIA plan when you were looking at how those TIF monies are going to be used and setting aside some resources for the redevelopment of Lansing Mall. That's one component of a whole bunch of other pieces that we could put together, and thinking about how are we going to be, you know, fully thinking about all of the different aspects to make sure that we get exactly what you want. Looking at those redevelopment tools and potential partners and having those conversations. And then looking even to policy and ordinance changes to really make sure that you're codifying or institutionalizing the look and feel of the corridor, or the types of development that you want to see, that you're providing that predictability, both for your own interest, but that for the community as well, that the community, you've asked them to participate in a plan process. You want to make sure that their voices are honored and that they can see the results of their involvement in the implementation of the plan document. And so the policy and ordinance pieces are part of that implementation. And then really kind of overall providing that stability and consistency in decision-making and that clarity and direction that will create those opportunities for investment and growth. That developers love knowing you know, that there's consistency and predictability. They may not like all the regulations, but they also aren't mind readers. And so they want to know what the rules are and then figure out how to work within those rules. So creating that stability really also helps. And so I just changed the date when I was looking at this, it was longer, but thinking about that, then how do you as a body really start to think about those things and how all those pieces fit together? How do you make sure that the community, when you're asking for their involvement, that their involvement is meaningful, both to you as far as the information you're getting from them, but also to them, that they feel like they're being listened to and that you've asked them thoughtful questions where they can really give you an answer that helps set a direction for the work that that's ahead of you, that you're going to be doing. So so part of that, actually, the good part about taking your time with the process and actually saying, we don't have all this money right now to jump into a big plan, is that you can do a lot of listening for over the next 9 months until January to really think about what the process is that you want to have and what those priorities might be. So I mentioned the examples of the special studies and what those might look like, or where those areas are, and to really scope that and get a good understanding of really what you need for a plan process, and hiring the right consultant, and the questions you want to ask the community is really kind of taking advantage of this time to be able to learn and listen from other people. So what I had offered to Brian was thinking about how do you have panel discussions that are programmed as part of your normal meetings, or you could also, which will be part of our discussion today, they could be evening meetings where you could invite the public. Either way, I mean, there's a number of different formats that could be used for these listening panels. But the idea is that we think about, 6 to 8 different groups that you might want to hear from, hear their perspectives to help you determine what you really think you might need in doing that community engagement and doing a more robust plan process. And so initially in this plan, talked about commercial industry impressions, hearing from commercial and real estate brokers and developers about what they think about the corridor, all parts of it, not just the part by the highway interchange. Same thing with the residential industry. You've got multifamily going on, senior living has been mentioned before for the Lansing Mall site. What are those opportunities that are out there, and really understanding from the market perspective what people might be talking about. Transportation, of course, being along the corridor. And I found through experience that they're really kind of two different conversations. If you've got MDOT and the Road Commission, you hear one perspective, but then also hearing from disabilities organizations and the bus system and Tri-County, kind of the non-motorized planning components and how those play into it. And then trying to piece those two together. It's a lot to try to put all of those groups into one meeting. And I found it really works best to have them kind of in two separate meetings. Green infrastructure and resiliency might be one to talk about, demographics and future trends, forward thinking. And then especially with MSU nearby, we can think about who are the experts that we would want to tap. And I'm sure some of you with your connections could think of great panelists in any one of these lists, but there might be other groups for the panel discussions, or we could switch some out, but that was the general idea. And then also just experiencing the corridor, thinking about traversing the corridor as a pedestrian, or you could even do as a bicyclist, or as a pedestrian with disabilities if you're in a wheelchair. What does that feel like, and where are those pain points, and how do you feel and experience the corridor? You have a lot of neighborhoods that abut it. How do the neighborhoods connect with the corridor and use that? So that's something to think about. We can also do a community survey to start to get general impressions from the community, almost a SWOT analysis. A SWOT is looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so we could start with some early engagement just using surveys. There's done it with we can do it on coasters in restaurants where there's a QR code, now that so many people are used to using that with COVID. But we could do it on signs and in other ways where people can pick up the survey. We could mail the survey to them, but different ways in which the public could interact and start to provide you some early ideas of where you think their priorities might be. And another option would be actually going and looking at other corridors. With Lansing being in mid-Michigan, we could go either east or west, but looking at other corridors and maybe how they've transformed over time and things to be mindful of as you're thinking about your planning. So that was kind of from a pre-planning, I call it, phase, really before you did a bigger community launch. On the process, there's softer things that you can do that really start to get you thinking about it, starting to frame some of the issues that you want to think about, and then really be intentional about the questions you ask the community so that you're getting the best input back possible. So I don't know if you have any questions for me, but I thought we could tackle the series of meetings if that's interesting to you, and talk about the groups and the format. And then also, if there's any key stakeholders that you'd want we can start populating that list. And then also if there was interest for walking or engaging on the corridor or other places to see what else has been done in other locations. So it's kind of the format for today's meeting.
Very well. That's a very good plan laid out there, Suzanne. So I want to turn things over now to members of the authority. Do folks have either first questions from Suzanne about what she's kind of recommended, or do you have thoughts you would like to offer or share on, what she has recommended to us and how we move forward? So Take either or right now, either questions or thoughts and comments.
Well, that was a lot. And thank you, Suzanne, for doing such an awesome job. I've missed a few meetings here and I apologize for that. So I'm trying to catch up. What would be the first step where we're at right now? As far as should we do some market research first, or should we have a community meeting, talk to the community?
Well, I think what Suzanne has laid out would be our next step.
Right, but I'm saying
she's
what are those
proposing-
steps for?
Right,
was
she's
a lot in there.
proposing that we invite these different, what did you call them, round tables? I forget what term you used.
The market
Panel
research.
discussion. She's recommended that we have our next series of meetings moving forward
Right.
is we dedicate each one to a panel discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So like theoretically on our list, she, had listed the commercial, industries in terms of what, people are looking, what they think works in this corridor stuff. Have a panel just kind of to talk to us about what they think works and stuff. Have a discussion where we bring in the housing, industry, all aspects of it to talk about what they see, what's needed, what they see, how the corridor could play in and how things fit in and stuff, and go through each of those panels. And that will help us then kind of start formulating where, kind of get our thoughts and stuff on what we want to start looking at in more detail. And she said that could lead to maybe we would want to do some smaller studies first, such as have an actual study on just what types of businesses will work in the corridor. What's retail or restaurants and stuff looking like in a corridor like this. So maybe we'd want to have some individual smaller studies done before we go into a big overall master planning for the corridor.
Okay.
And then she also just suggested as part of it, maybe an introductory outreach to the public, where we just kind of get some initial thoughts and feedback from them that can then help our decision making as we move forward with and coming up with our planning for, coming up with an overall master plan that then would engage the public in a much greater way and a much different way and stuff. So that's what she's proposing is our next steps would be these series of roundtable panel discussions where we kind of dive into these things, ask these types of questions and stuff, and then use the information we gain from that to kind of help guide us then into how we, our next steps to get to that point, which ultimately will be a master plan for the corridor.
I like that idea.
Well, it makes sense, but where do you start? I mean, in your mind, is the feedback from community first, or should we get the research panels and start with that?
Yeah.
And who, I mean, how do we decide where to start, I guess?
It can be both. I mean, we could develop a survey, and while the survey is out and the public is filling out the survey, you could have it open for a couple of weeks. You could start having those panel discussions. The beauty of it is the panel discussions really don't cost you anything. I mean, you're inviting local realtors and local developers and, the road commission and MDOT to a meeting to hear from them about their perspectives about the corridor in general. And we could we can do the survey at the same time. But it's just really to give you a scan of what's out there, what impressions are of the corridor, and just to start giving you a basis of information so that you can decide what studies you do think you need, or what questions you might have that need additional study and detail that you wouldn't get from the local community.
I like your comment about the county road commission and MDOT, getting those public entities, maybe even CATA, to talk about the corridor itself. Would hate to lose an opportunity along the corridor. I'm not sure if there's plans for additional work along the corridor, but definitely want to piggyback on those opportunities. So I don't know if there's any updates there, but I think I would start there. And then those panel conversations, I like the approach about having those separate panel conversations around housing, commercial. There's a whole other variety of topics. Than the Survey Monkey type questions where you can get quick information. And then bring it back to this group and talk about next steps.
Yeah.
Oh, go on.
No, please, go ahead.
I was just gonna talk a little bit about Laura. I think that Suzanne said we can do public input along with it, but I think some of the value of this is to help kind of feed into questions we might want to ask to help guide questions. So if we're putting out a survey, we might want, rather than put out a survey now and get 500 responses that say, well, traffic is bad.
Right.
This might meet hearing from MDOT and the road commission might give us some more information about the future where we could have some more nuanced questions to get more valuable feedback from the public or businesses along the corridor too. So just in thinking about that ordering, some of that information is helpful to have as we then go into corridor planning and have more robust public involvement.
So we have more knowledge before we figure out
Yes.
what the survey should be asking. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I would envision it to like best help us understand what we need to be looking at
Mhm.
before we move forward with engaging the public, so that we're doing it in a succinct and educational way. So yeah, kind of like I support like the process and like that order that Brian just suggested.
Mhm. Does it make sense to even start like with what Tony's saying with the MDOT and Eaton County first, just because we know that their timeline is a little bit more
I would think
critical?
sooner than later with them,
Yeah.
just because, but I mean, I'm open to.
Yeah.
Anything.
I mean, it
We
certainly
would
makes
at least
sense.
have
I
future
mean, they're the
plans
owner
anyway.
Right.
of the corridor as well, right? I mean, that's their right away.
Right, and especially if we're not looking at like having money to start funding anything until fiscal of next or 2023,
Yep,
then how long is it gonna take for that study to get done?
yep.
And they're still moving forward, so I think the sooner that we can at least let them know that we're interested or that we just want to hear what they're doing, the better for the project in general,
Agreed.
Yeah,
so.
because yeah, we know that
That makes
that does
sense.
have plans. So hearing, what the plans are right now, their timeline and everything, and then knowing how we can then interact with them in terms of if we do have,
Yeah.
suggestions and stuff. And then also, what we hear from them are part of the stuff too. I think we
Right.
should go back to the public then and ask them about. And it was mentioned, the CATA and the E-Tran. I know that both of those entities are having joint conversations, but I know they're talking about trying to find a way to extend CATA service down the corridor. So I think having them, tell us what their thoughts are, and what they're looking at right now and everything, and then using that as well to then go back to the public to ask the public in terms of what do they think of that and what are there needs that maybe aren't being addressed by that can help formulate that before they actually do it, because I know that, they'll be discussing they're doing something. So I do think that by having these sessions and talking to the various, if we want to call them experts and stuff, I think that will help us put together a pretty good initial survey to really start getting feedback from the public on very specific things, as opposed to a generic, do you think traffic's bad at Saginaw? Which, that's not gonna really give us any useful
No.
feedback.
No.
But if you can go to
100%.
and say, but if you can go back and say, CATA is discussing running CATA service all the way down the corridor. Is that a service you would use? Is that a service that you think there's a need for? You think there's another spot that it should be going to? Then you can start getting some real specific questions that can really then give you the feedback to help guide that. So I think that's what's being laid out makes a lot of sense. I think the transportation piece very well could be the first one that we start with. Since traffic is the
That is
biggest
true.
concern that you hear from everybody. Ever since it's open, the crossings has opened up. That's the first thing that you hear from public. Geez, it's getting busy there, So if we can at least, I know at least on that section, they obviously have plans to boulevard it. So hear specifically what that is, then hear about what their plans are for the rest of the corridor. And then, take that back to the public to get some feedback, because none of that's happening, tomorrow. So, they
Right.
can present to us and we'd have time to take it to the public.
Yeah, I like the opportunity to study this and get the input from the community, that type thing. I think this is a good learning session for us to do that. I'd also add, she also mentioned looking at other corridors in Lansing, such as the east and the west, hearing what their input was in terms of putting their corridor improvements together. What were some of the concerns? What were some of the things that they learned from the process, good and bad, as we go along the way, so that we can anticipate perhaps how we can deal with some of these things as we continue to move forward.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there actually has been a Saginaw Corridor Improvement Authority on the stretches that are in Lansing.
That's
and
correct.
Lansing Township. So having, at the very least, having them come and, meet with us and share with us what they've looked at and what they've discussed so far would be beneficial. But I think, also just as kind of a guiding, even hearing about all the corridors in the region that have had it, some of them I think may have just gotten started too, but if there's any that have had some experience, just hearing what that is, because it does obviously translate, even if it's a different corridor, the type of stuff that they've looked at translates into what we want to do here. So I think that's good. Another thing I think would be, makes sense to add in terms of the panels, in addition to the corridors in the area, but also possibly if they're willing to come in, is the Lansing Mall. Have the current ownership come in and just talk to us about what is
That
their
would be
vision for the
fantastic.
property. I know that we
Yeah.
we often talk in terms of, we talk in terms of, at some point that property will need to be redeveloped. They may not think it needs to be redeveloped, or they may already have plans to redevelop it under their own terms. So, so I think just hearing what their vision is and what their 5-10 year vision is for that property, I think would be very important to our discussions, because there could be areas to work together, or if they got their own plans and they say thanks, but no thanks, we're doing our own thing, then we obviously focus on, other stuff. So if they're willing to come in and meet with us and actually kind of share their thoughts and their vision and stuff, I think that would be very beneficial to us to do that.
I like that idea in terms of bringing them in early in the process. If they have something that they're planning as a hallmark and as the key for, Delta Township, we could even think about building our corridor in conjunction with supporting some of the activities that they have, as opposed to taking away the money at, the corridors from the Lansing Mall. We're not competing with them. If there's a way we can work together, it's beneficial for everyone and makes it a whole lot easier for the customers.
Yep, absolutely. Folks have other thoughts based on what they've heard so far that they think we should add to the list of panel discussions, or any particular thoughts on the order? We've already said that the transportation can be our first.
Are you gonna do the disabilities one right after that? So you have both transportation? Because they're separate, they're not together.
Right, but in terms of like immediate needs, so would it be like the MDOT situation, then CADA, then maybe the mall, and then we can go back to me like the disabilities of the other retail space, the housing? Like I would just recommend we prioritize what the panel discussions in order of the corridor's priorities.
Right.
So like I would recommend totally starting with MDOT and then CADA.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And then you said after CADA, E-Tran, then have the mall come in, then what do you think comes, what should we come next with? The overall commercial, the disabilities, or the housing?
So we got transportation first.
Yeah, first would be MDOT and the road commission.
Yeah.
Then the next would be the CADA and E-Tran, we'll call that public transit.
Okay.
And then a discussion with the Lansing Mall.
Yep.
And then after that, we can, the commercial panel, the housing panel, a panel on the corridor from a perspective of walkability, disability,
So maybe we could do the walkability disability next, because just still watching people recover from the pandemic and businesses, like I'd rather wait as long as we can to talk about what that means for commercial space as studies and information is being collected. And then I know with housing, Tri-County's housing study will be done at the end of June, and then Michigan's housing study is coming out in like the next couple of months as well. So like to wait until after those studies are out to talk to people and developers about housing. So just from those are just my thoughts.
So walkability, disability, after the Lansing Mall, then, by then, what do you think should be first? The housing, you said June, and let's see, we're kind of, yeah, we'll be past that point.
Yeah, we
Should we
could
do
do, like-
commercial before housing or housing first, do you think?
If you have strong thoughts either way.
Did we mention commercial and industrial?
Not industrial, just because we're talking about the
Because it's the
corridor,
corridor.
no
Okay,
industrial
okay.
here, so really
Okay.
just,
Okay.
commercial.
All right.
I did think that the mention of the Saginaw Highway Corridor Authorities further down in other jurisdictions, it might be interesting to find out what they've done. I really like them as a suggestion for a panel, because they may have other studies before we
Right.
get into the commercial and residential discussions. They may already be working on something that might help inform then the questions you might ask the commercial and residential folks.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'd kind of forgotten about that piece of it.
So you're talking about Lansing Township?
Lansing
portion?
City, yeah, Lansing City and Lansing
Mhm.
Township. I think they have a joint one, if I'm not mistaken. Do you know, Brian? I think they may have created a joint authority for Saginaw through Lansing Township and City of Lansing,
Did they?
but I can't remember.
Soka? I'm not known. So to go past the,
I can't remember if
point.
that was for Saginaw or if that was for Michigan.
I guess.
They did one for Saginaw, I know, because they talked to us at the time it was being created.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know that went beyond the point though, the Saginaw, the Soka. Saginaw Oakland corridor,
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Okay.
But,
which is Lansing.
right,
I know Lansing did one. I didn't know if they did one,
I've not heard of
collaborative one with
collaborative.
Lansing Township.
yeah, we can see if they did, then we can just have Lansing City.
Yeah, and one of those corridors is relatively new. They're just starting up,
Right.
so I don't know which one it is, but yeah, it's just starting up. Now's a good
Would
time.
this- Would it would also be good to have Tri-County at that meeting? I'm wondering, I know,
I'm not
Right?
there anymore.
You're not there anymore?
No, I'm not.
You don't?
No, I'm the state.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
don't you think Tri-County would be good
Congratulations.
for this?
For which piece? The corridors or I think for a variety of them it could be.
The city of Lansing corridor study conversation.
Yeah, I would invite them to that.
Like that.
Well, especially because they did the Michigan app, like I would
Yeah,
invite
they're
them.
doing
Yep,
Michigan.
absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
That makes sense. Don't want to catch anybody by surprise,
I'm
right? Sort of
happy to
cover
reach out to
bases.
them though. We're still, we have a good relationship.
connections,
so.
yeah.
Yeah.
Besides the
I'm
mall,
worried- oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna ask, besides the Lansing Mall, is there any major players on the corridor, employers? I'm thinking, I don't know, Farm Bureau, even off the corridor that could help influence. I saw the note about sustainability, green infrastructure. Has there been any conversations with the General Motors and with the EV initiative along the corridor? Stuff like that.
Yeah, clearly nothing along the corridor as far as the General Motors or anything like that. Oh, a potential player we should meet with if something happens is obviously the Ike property.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
If they get an interested buyer, obviously having some conversations or what they're thinking, what they're, talking about, would become very important too. But until they get, somebody, I'm not sure if just bringing in the attorney who is, handling the sale necessarily does anything. So I'm not sure if I want to necessarily do that, but once they get if they get a serious buyer, have them come in and meet with us and talk to us about what their thoughts and visions, I think would be very important along there.
You could capture that second group though, kind of from a big opportunity standpoint, just kind of grouping them. I like the Farm Bureau, GM, Lansing Mall, like what are some of the big opportunities that you might want to be aware of that might be on the horizon to have them come in? So that might be an interesting panel as well.
This Farm Bureau's completing like a $30 million gutting of their buildings. So I don't know if they have any additional plans, but
Probably not. I'm not sure if we'd get General Motors to come and participate to talk about the corridor. That could be problematic getting them to even show up. Why are we here talking about your corridor?
Well, there is
But
every,
they all have to attract employees though. And
Right.
so I think it's what does the corridor have to offer their employees that will make that more attractive for them to bring in people.
I'm just looking at it as a regional hub. Looking at what, there's other parts of the state in Macomb County, for an example, Monroe. You know, they brought in, I mean, that's obviously, you have multiple facilities, if it's General Motors, if it's Chrysler up there, but there's a lot of innovation up there. This corridor here has a lot going for it as well. I just, you know, with the interstate cutting it through it and what you have down with where the mall is, where the other properties, there's a lot of potential, but it's going to affect the greater area. So that's, I don't know if you guys have had any conversations with those individuals. It sounds like not really. So maybe it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Good.
No, I think definitely open to having conversations with those big entities and stuff. If they're willing to come and engage in a broader conversation about, Suzanne hit the nail on the head too, that maybe there needs to be another discussion just on the whole discussion of placemaking in terms of, what do people want to see that would help them attract workers to their facilities, Amazon and GM and stuff, all are gonna have to do a lot of hiring. Do they have thoughts at what they're hearing and what do people want to see to make this a more attractive place for them to be? And then how can the corridor obviously play a role in part of that, if there is a role for the corridor? So maybe that's something, at least part of the discussion to have with them if they're willing to come in, and then we may want to have some type of other placemaking type of discussion on what do people find lacking that the corridor maybe could help solve that issue.
No, that sounds great.
It does.
Makes a lot of sense.
Who's
So on
bringing-
my list, I've got, the first would be MDOT and
like
the Road
this.
Commission and CATA. And then if you wanted to do big employers, okay, the Lansing Mall or the big opportunities, whatever we want to call it, placemaking, and then disability non-motorized, third, and then fourth, Saginaw corridor and tri-county planning. And then would it be commercial then residential?
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think, were you combining MDOT and CATA? Because I
I
think
was
those
gonna
would
say
be
MDOT
two
was first,
separate.
right?
Yeah.
MDOT and Road Commission should be first, and then
Right.
CATA and E-Tran would be a separate discussion.
Okay. It might make sense to do MDOT Road Commission and then CATA and E-Tran as their first and second meeting, because that would also give us time to hopefully find the right people. That would give us plenty of time to find the right people for that panel discussion of the big opportunities.
And we think that should be third then?
It could be, or we could push the other corridors to third before we move forward, that if we need more time to get the other people at the table with the other meetings.
It may make sense to do the other corridors, hearing what they've discussed, I think makes sense before we get too far down the road. So maybe we move that up, make that a third, and then make the bigger other players and opportunities the fourth.
And the mall is included in that one, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That makes a lot.
You're gonna send us out a clean copy of this, right?
My scribbles are all over.
Because I was scribbled all over.
What happened to walkability?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask the same question.
That was in
Then that'd be after, that'd be like the fifth panels.
That'd be
That'll be after the larger-
Walkability and disability. After the larger, yeah,
After the-
Lansing
okay.
Mall.
Active transportation is 5. Walkability.
I was gonna merge the E-Tran CATA with disability, walkability in 2, if that makes any sense.
I'll make that
Or do you think
into-
that's- Yeah,
Is that too
Is
much
every-
for just one?
I think so too.
The public
Is this a
transportation is such a
one-time
big
panel,
conversation. I
Susan?
would just focus on that. Or that would be my preference.
I would
should
agree
say.
with you. I mean, the
Okay.
walkable is, that could go, I don't know the township's plan, if there is a big plan that you want to.
Well, we're talking about like place creation too, could walkability and disability and like addressing like that kind of welcoming environment be part of that conversation if we're trying to merge? If we're limited
I like
on,
Yeah, walkability and placemaking, including access in that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they can do the access with that one.
Do you want that before or after the commercial and residential discussions?
Well, we do that before, I think.
Mhm.
You guys think before?
Yeah.
Agreed.
That one might be interesting to do, have best practices or case studies with.
And there's some, obviously some advocacy groups too. We can have in to hear from them. I know there's a bike group, Adult the Bike Coalition, I forget the exact name of the group and stuff that have thoughts on, walkability, accessibility along the corridor and everything. So having them present their thoughts and stuff. Would be good too to hear from them.
Mhm.
We have scooters in Delta?
We do not have scooters yet.
Good.
You don't want scooters.
Oh, geez, they're all over the
I
place.
don't think I want to see a scooter on Saginaw.
Thank you. Oh, wait.
Well, maybe I'd like to see some people on a scooter on Saginaw. but I don't want to see scooters in general.
How fast can you go?
That's
No match.
Well, I think we got quite the schedule. I think that's gonna obviously fill up
That's great.
a lot of meetings moving forward to get all this in. But I think then all of that will then lead us to be able to then draft, I think, a very good, very specific, initial community survey.
Yes.
That we can then get feedback from them and then take all of it, and then we can then have a very, I think a lot of good data and some real good, real discussions that can then lead into then, okay, the next step. So what do we do, which will help us really focus our work and make sure that we're just not out, kind of in a shotgun type, focus that we're really looking at things before we then go to looking at the next studies and the next things that we need. And when you get to the point where you're, looking to contract for an overall plan, you really got a lot to feed into that. That consultant when you have them before they even start. So, obviously they will really help us. We have really good engagement of stakeholders, residents and businesses and, folks and stuff. But the more stuff you can really feed that person, that group to, really focus their attention to start with, really greatly improves the product that you end up with. So I think all this stuff is actually quite valuable. And I don't think we should, even if we had resources right away, I don't think that we should skip past
Oh,
this.
correct.
stuff.
No.
This is perfect.
So for clarification purposes, we're going to start doing these panel discussions during our regular scheduled meeting times.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, we'll start scheduling them in and pulling them together, and that will be the focus of our meetings. And obviously, at some point, we'll have a development agreement that we'll have to deal with for Delta Crossing, so.
Minor detail.
I hope our next meeting, but if not, we'll still do this. So we'll have to discuss whether or not we want to, if we get a development agreement, do we just want to schedule maybe a special meeting or something to deal with that and start then getting on the regular meetings, these panel discussions plugged in and everything, and just, once it's ready, have a different,
That
meeting, a
makes
separate
sense.
meeting to deal with a development agreement and not try to deal with that first on some night that we have a panel discussion.
Yeah, I would support that.
Yeah.
And
Get
then
that.
your meetings, yeah, and so your meetings are open to the public, and I think this is also being recorded. But wanted to make sure that if you wanted, I wanted to also touch on whether or not, how you want the community, this is part of your regular business, but then also whether or not you think it'd be beneficial for the community to listen in, or just to say you're going to be doing these listening sessions as an update in the township newsletter. So if people wanted to tune in just to hear the conversation, they could. Just trying to think of like how you might want to make it kind of visible or known that you're doing these listening panels or the panel discussions for the community.
Not really sure on that. You know, clearly, obviously, it's an open public meeting and public is certainly welcome, but do we want to necessarily? At this point, we're more just kind of gathering information. So I'm not really sure if we're really at the public engagement. They certainly are welcome to, you know, participate, but do we really want to start really advertising this? I don't know, thoughts?
When was the last public meeting? It was November, right?
The last meeting.
Yeah,
We had meetings this year.
The development, well, I mean, specifically around the corridor improvement authority and
At the
the
board
plan.
meeting?
We had our public hearing for the TIF plan, December
It
6th.
was December 6th.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's something to be said for transparency. I know that we've talked about that, you know, a lot. But even if they're calling in and listening or via Zoom, whatever, they can't talk, right? So all they can do is listen and gather information, which will probably write down and might be wrong. And so that's what you don't want to have happen then outside, is that people start talking about things that they've just completely gotten wrong or misconstrued or what have you. So that would be the concern.
Yeah, you know, that people, like you said, they don't necessarily understand what necessarily we're doing yet. You don't want to start, you know, a discussion on CATA talking about options. The next thing is new, you're seeing on social media, this big discussion. Oh, CATA is moving in and we're gonna all be taxed, you know, 3 mils. And, you know, to stop this CATA from coming in, you know.
Yeah.
That really happens.
That's how that happens.
Yeah.
That really happens. So I think we do want to be engage the public in a way where we're presenting them with information, asking their feedback in focused ways as opposed to generically encouraging, you know, I definitely, you know, updates on the work with the authority, I think is fine, but in terms of, I'm just a little leery of just the specifically asking the public to come watch kind of that early process where there's not really filtering, we're just kind of gathering information and they then, as Peggy said, interpreting it on their own and out on social media, and next thing you know, you got opposition and firestorm starting when we haven't come up with anything yet. Yeah, you got people out there already starting their
Your phone
opposition.
start
and stuff.
ringing, you know?
Right.
So-
So that'd be my only thoughts and hesitations to making a big deal about we're having these panel discussions. I think it's more to help guide our thoughts and our questions and stuff to take it to that next level where you start really engaging the public.
But maybe that's something that could go into the newsletter or that we get out there. So
That's what I was
this
thinking,
date
is
and
like,
whatever
we're
date in the
just
future.
generalizing
Yeah.
for their next 9 months, this is what we'll be doing.
Yep.
And then it's in the newsletter,
I like that.
and the agendas are still posted, so they're still
Mhm.
welcome.
Right, exactly. And let them know that we, in the fall, will be coming with a community survey.
Correct.
To ask, you know, their thoughts on the various things that we're, you know, learning about and gathering throughout
Yeah.
this process. When the panel discussions.
I like laying out their roadmap.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If it's
same.
a 6,
That's
9,
good.
12-month roadmap.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yep, let everybody know what the work is and what we're doing, what we're focused on. I think that's all very good, because there are questions from some of those who are engaged on exactly what is it that the authority is working on now? What is next, you know? So this helps lay out what the next is and kind of explain to them, you know, our process to get to ultimately a final product of having a grand vision for the corridor. What we want to do there.
Yeah, we could also work on preparing meeting notes. So from the panel discussion, you could, as part of your normal business, I mean, you won't have like formal minutes per se. I mean, you will, but we could try to capture the meeting notes, and then before the notes are released, provide an opportunity for both the panelists and the in your committee to review them, and then, you know, actually publish them just as part of the learnings, that, you know, just documentation of some of the learnings and discussion So if ever it comes up, then you've got a memory, even for your own purposes, to be able to reflect on.
Definitely like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, no,
that makes a lot of
that's
sense.
excellent. Yeah, we definitely want to have that captured in terms of what was discussed and everything in a good, concise way.
No, that'd be really good.
Well, I think we have our game plan moving forward then. So thank you, Suzanne. We appreciate you guiding that conversation and that discussion.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, this is exciting. I am a big proponent of doing this pre-planning work when you're going to do something that is as significant as what you're going to be doing. Just the benefit of the discussion that you'll undertake in the next several months. I think you're really going to find it very valuable when you get into actually the public engagement phase, because you're going to feel much more equipped as a body to be able to understand what's happening, to be able to ask those really important questions, and to be able to address the community's concerns and questions in a much more robust way than if you were kind of going into a planning process cold. This really kind of gets you oriented towards everything and all the topics. So I'm really excited for you guys to start this process.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Do folks have anything else they'd like to raise tonight?
I have one, just one additional, just looking at the list.
Mhm.
Is this the time, or would it just something to think about regarding to utilities? I think when we initially had the conversation, somebody brought up early on all the overhead power lines and underground, I mean, do we bring in have a conversation with the Lansing Board of Water and Light, for an example? Is that something that is not the right
That could
time?
be saved for the study part if we wanted
Okay.
to address, if it was still a priority.
Yeah, like I said, they're just thinking through who would be those major stakeholders, and whoever's out there would be not only MDOT, but you have the board and consumers, and you have the telecoms, broadband service around up and down the corridor. I don't know if that would be, if there's any value to that. I don't know why you guys are smiling, but I'd love to know.
I could bring them in anytime.
Oh,
I'm with the board water.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know, that was so funny.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just said if we knew anybody from the Board of Water and Light, I was
Yeah.
trying
Yeah.
Does that make sense, or do we table that until we get a little deeper?
I guess I'd lean towards tabling that until we get you. I don't know if I necessarily want us to have a debate on whether or not we buried the power lines. I think that that's a topic that's obviously been debated a lot over the decades and stuff. And there's obviously pluses and minuses and astronomical costs associated.
I was gonna
with
say
it.
that's
a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I think, I'd rather go along in the planning and maybe as part of that process, especially the public engagement on whether or not they really feel that there really is that big of a need and stuff, before we really necessarily sit down here and get into this, basically a debate over the pros and cons
for sure.
of whether or not those lines should be buried. Try to let it push that conversation down the road a little bit.
If there is any thought about it, though, again, this piece out here to the west, if MDOT's gonna come in and reconstruct that, right, it's gonna be open, that would be the time to sort of start that process, I would imagine.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
that'd be probably the most cost effective to do that.
Sure.
So, okay. That's it. That's all I got.
I mean, right now, they're not doing that at the crossings, are they? Everything's above ground.
Right, they're not bearing anything that's existing though.
But they're having to run new electricity lines and everything, so. Are they running that above
All
ground?
the powers, the thing.
Not sure what they do.
I think it's all below.
I mean, now would be the time when it's all
I'm
dug
trying to
up and
picture it.
everything's brand new and they're running it,
No, I
but
think it's all, I think they're burying it.
are they?
Is that for the
Assume there's something
pedestrian
to be-
crossings
Yeah, Laura was asking about Delta Crossings, everything within that development.
within?
I believe it's all underground. I think it's all dug bank and it's all below
Things,
grade.
yeah.
But like to
Makes
Ken's
sense.
point, none of the existing stuff along Saginaw, obviously it's all above.
Right.
So-
That's why I was thinking, good Lord, that would be a lot of money.
It's
It's
a
like,
lot of money.
It would be huge.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It would be just
The last estimate from the board Water and Light was about $12 million per mile.
Yep.
So it'd be looking at $50 million
to do the whole thing.
4 miles worth of.
So what are the trade-offs with the money that we will generate? To be able to do
So
things
the
like
question is, Laura,
this?
do you want us to raise the tax on your farm? $50 million
I think and it's certainly, we included some dollars in the TIF to do a little bit more formal study, because I know that there's some people who question whether or not that's an accurate number, and certainly hasn't been fully engineered, but I think that's one of those pieces of information that's maybe helpful as, you know, you get feedback from the public to know, because it isn't, even if they reconstruct the road, that's where everybody said that's the time to drop it in there, but you're not just looking at that. You'll have to dig up almost every parking lot down here to get services to the building. You have to connect to the neighborhoods on
Yeah.
each side. There's a lot of issues that are, above my head in terms of dealing with the transformers and problems that come from having buried utilities with that amount of voltage. So it's not as simple as like in a 2-block downtown area or a brand new development where you say, okay, we're going to start with everything buried, and then you have all the different utilities as well. So it's a substantial undertaking.
Not to mention business disruption after
Yes,
a long
huge.
period
Oh,
of
yeah.
disrupted business.
Correct. Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of factors that we need to come into that, but it should be discussed, but I just think
Yeah.
down the road a little
Okay.
bit. If nobody has any belts, our next regular meeting is scheduled for Monday, May 9th, but as we said, if the development agreement is ready before then, we may try to pull everybody together into a special meeting before then to deal with the development agreement, but if not separate from that, we'll plan on coming back on May 9th with the first, assuming that we can get them to come in for that first time, the MDOT discussion. Now, we may need to, obviously too, we should caveat, we can't put this nice ranking on how we want to hold these. It may also
just gonna
determine
say.
when we can get these people. to
You're
come
really
in.
good,
So
Ken, because you know
our
that.
list may get shook up just based on what we
Yeah.
have available, so. We'll try our best to do things in the order that we've laid it out in the most logical way.
I would suspect too, I think MDOT is the best one to start out with, but after we get through some of these, we may want to loop MDOT in again on the back end, once, you start
Yeah.
hearing a lot of the things and that type of thing, and there'll obviously be a major stakeholder when we get to the corridor
Right.
planning, because hopefully it will tie in more with their
Sure.
10-year plan or whatever, for the corridor.
Great.
Makes sense.
Well, if nobody else has anything else, we'll see no further business before us. We are adjourned.
Yeah.